The nuclear bear. It was October 1962, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world was closer to nuclear war than ever before, and tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were razor sharp. At a U.S. Air Force base in Duluth, Minnesota, a guard spotted a figure trying to climb the fence. With Soviet sabotage a real fear, the guard fired his weapon and hit the emergency alarm. That alarm was wired to nearby bases. One of them, Volkfield in Wisconsin, received the signal, but due to a wiring error, it triggered something far worse. Instead of the sabotage alarm, it activated the launch siren. It was the cue for nuclear-armed fighter jets to scramble, jets already on high alert, fully armed, and told that any alarm meant a real Soviet attack. Pilots rushed to their jets, engines were fired up, and the runway lit up with red lights as they prepared to take off. But then, an officer at Volkfield realized what was happening. He jumped into a car, raced down the runway, and waved the jets down before they could lift off. Had he been a minute later, those planes might have crossed into Soviet airspace, triggering World War III. And the figure that caused it all was not a Soviet saboteur at all. It was just a black bear wandering near the fence, insulting Genghis Khan's diplomats. In 1218, Genghis Khan was at peace with the Khwarezmian Empire. The two powers shared trade routes. There was no war or hostility. So when Genghis sent a caravan of merchants across the border, he expected business as usual. But the local governor in Otrar had other ideas. He accused the merchants of spying, seized their goods, and executed them. Instead of retaliating immediately, Genghis Khan gave diplomacy one more shot. He sent 3 envoys unarmed to the Shah, demanding justice. The Shah responded by beheading and sending them back humiliated. In Mongol culture, killing a messenger wasn't just an insult. It was an open declaration of war. So Genghis declared war. He led a full-scale invasion of over 100,000 men. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand were leveled. The Khwarezmian Empire ceased to exist. Millions died. And the Mongols didn't stop there. They pushed west into Persia, the Caucasus, and parts of Eastern Europe. All because one Shah thought he could send back a severed head without consequences. The Defenestration of Prague. In 1618, the halls of Prague Castle echoed with tension. The Kingdom of Bohemia was part of the Holy Roman Empire, but its Protestant nobles were growing restless under a Catholic king who had begun stripping away their religious freedoms. Years of rising distrust, royal decrees, and broken promises had left the Protestant estates on edge. So when 2 imperial governors arrived to enforce the king's will, they walked into a chamber full of angry nobles. Heated words turned into accusations, and those accusations turned into action. The nobles grabbed the governors along with their secretary, dragged them across the room, and threw them out the 3rd-story window of the castle. They fell over 20 meters into a moat filled with filth, but somehow survived. But the fall wasn't the real impact. It was the spark. That act of defiance lit the fuse of what would become the 30 Years' War, a continent-wide religious conflict that would devastate Central Europe. Armies marched, cities burned, and entire regions were depopulated by war, famine, and plague. Over 8 million people would die before the dust settled. China abandons its navy. In the early 1400s, China wasn't just a land empire. It ruled the seas. Under Emperor Yongle, massive treasure fleets commanded by Admiral Zheng He sailed as far as East Africa. These weren't just trading ships. They were floating cities, hundreds of vessels, some over 400 feet long, carrying diplomats, soldiers, scientists, and goods. China was projecting power, building alliances, and showing the world who led the seas. But after Yongle's death, things changed. Confucian scholars in the Ming court saw naval expeditions as wasteful and morally corrupting. Resources were redirected inward toward defending the northern borders and maintaining order at home. By 1525, the Chinese government had banned the construction of ocean-going ships. The shipyards fell silent, and the once great navy was now nothing at all. Byzantine refusal of engineer Orban. In the 1450s, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former glory. Once rulers of the Eastern Roman world, they were now clinging to their capital, Constantinople, surrounded by Ottoman forces on all sides. A Hungarian engineer named Orban came up with a solution. He designed a cannon, unlike anything seen before, a super weapon capable of breaking even the thickest walls. Orban offered his creation to Emperor Constantine XI, but the Byzantines were broke. They didn't have the money or the resources to fund his work, so they turned him away. Orban didn't wait. He took his plans to the Ottomans. Sultan Mehmed II welcomed him and gave him everything he needed. Months later, the walls of Constantinople shook as Orban's massive bombard fired round after round, breaking down the stone walls, causing the fall of Constantinople, the fall of the Berlin Wall. It was November 9th, 1989. East Germany was tense. Protesters were gathering daily, demanding reforms, freedom of movement, and the right to leave. Behind the scenes, the East German government was scrambling to find a solution that wouldn't end in collapse. Günter Schabowski, a government spokesman who wasn't fully briefed, spoke during a routine press conference. When he was asked about the reforms, Schabowski shuffled through his papers and casually mentioned a new travel policy that would ease travel restriction to travel to West Germany. When asked when the new rule would go into effect, he hesitated and said the words that would change history, as far as I know, immediately. Within minutes, Western news stations were broadcasting that East Germany has opened its borders. The message spread like wildfire. Thousands of East Berliners marched toward the Berlin Wall. The guards weren't given orders. Confused and overwhelmed, they had no idea what to do. Around 11:30 p.m., a lone border guard made a decision to open the gate. Crowds surged into West Berlin. Strangers hugged, families reunited, and the Berlin Wall collapsed due to one misstatement: the mold that changed medicine. It was 1928. Alexander Fleming had just returned from a 2-week vacation to his messy lab in London's St. Mary's Hospital. One Petri dish, a forgotten experiment on Staphylococcus bacteria, had something strange growing in it. Around a cluster of mold, the bacteria had died. The mold was Penicillium notatum, and what it released was penicillin, the world's first true antibiotic. Fleming's accidental discovery eventually led to treatments that saved millions of lives from infections that once killed with ease. But it almost didn't happen. Fleming published his findings in 1929, but few cared. The mold was hard to extract and funding was scarce. It took over a decade in World War II for 2 researchers in Oxford, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, to take Fleming's work seriously. They refined the process, figured out mass production, and finally brought penicillin to the battlefield. Infections that once doomed soldiers were now curable. By 1945, penicillin was called the wonder drug, and Fleming, Florey, and Chain shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine. Kim Jong-Nam's Disneyland trip. Kim Jong-Nam was born into power, the eldest son of North Korea's supreme leader, Kim Jong-il. He was expected to inherit the regime. He held key positions in the Ministry of Public Security and oversaw North Korea's emerging IT system. But everything changed in 2001. That year, Kim Jong-nam was detained at Tokyo's Narita airport. He was traveling under a fake Dominican passport, attempting to visit Tokyo Disneyland. The incident was a humiliation for North Korea, one so severe that Kim Jong-il canceled a planned diplomatic visit to China in response. In the years that followed, Jong-nam was quietly exiled from the regime. He drifted between China, Macau, and Southeast Asia, living in comfortable isolation. He gave occasional interviews to foreign journalists and maintained a lifestyle of quiet luxury. Intelligence agencies believed he had ties to Chinese officials, and some reports suggested he even worked as a CIA informant. But his presence was a problem. In 2010, Kim Jong-un, his younger half-brother, was officially chosen as North Korea's next leader. From that point on, Kim Jong-nam became a potential threat. South Korean intelligence reported that Kim Jong-un gave standing orders for his assassination. Jong-nam, aware of the danger, reportedly wrote a letter to his brother begging for his life to be spared. But on February 13, 2017, at Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, 2 women approached Kim Jong-nam and rubbed a substance across his face. Within minutes, he collapsed. The substance was VX nerve agent, one of the most lethal chemical weapons on Earth. The women were arrested, but claimed they were told it was a prank video for a TV show. NOAD computer glitch. It was just past midnight on November 9th, 1979, when lights began flashing at the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Computers showed hundreds of Soviet nuclear missiles in flight, heading straight for the United States. Within seconds, Strategic Air Command was on high alert. Bombers were scrambled. Nuclear-armed planes rolled toward the runway. The President's National Security Advisor was alerted. Everything looked real. All indicators showed that World War III had just begun. But none of it was real. There were no incoming missiles. The entire emergency and panic had been triggered by a single computer chip. A faulty 46-cent computer chip, connected to a training simulation system, had mistakenly fed a war scenario into the live defense network. Operators believed they were seeing actual Soviet missile launches because the simulation was indistinguishable from reality on their screens. Had anyone fired back, even by accident, it would have been a nuclear catastrophe. The Maginot Line. After the devastation of World War I, France was determined to never again face a German invasion across its eastern border, so it built a wall of concrete, steel, and tunnels that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, and artillery turrets that rose from the ground like mechanical beasts. It was meant to be impenetrable. It was meant to buy time and to stop the next war before it began. But France made one critical assumption, that Germany would attack the same way it had in 1914. So they fortified that stretch heavily and left the Ardennes itself barely defended, believing the terrain was too dense and difficult for tanks. In May 1940, Germany proved them wrong. Hitler's generals sent the bulk of their forces straight through the Ardennes, bypassing the Maginot Line completely. What the French thought was impassable forest turned out to be the perfect surprise route. The French were surrounded and forced to surrender without a shot. In less than 6 weeks, France fell.